And yesterday, of course, the Supreme Court of Appeal Justice Mandisa was the only female candidate. She was being interviewed. And interestingly, one of the questions, and it's a question that jarred with me, maybe it shouldn't, maybe it should, I don't know, you will make up your mind as well, regarding whether South Africa is ready for a female Chief Justice. And the answer, of course, was more than perfect. We've always been ready since the dawn of this democracy. But of course, Justice Maya, of course, giving her views there, and some interesting questions being asked about, for example, some of the cases from which she's had to recuse herself as well, and her responses to those. So I believe Karyn is back with us. So let's try this again. Karyn, hopefully it's second time lucky, so you can hear me and we can get this ball rolling. I've been waiting way too long for this. So firstly, just give me your overall impression of the first two candidates.
I think that, obviously, as you were talking about earlier, President Mandisa is the candidate to beat at this point. I think it's very apparent. She has made it very clear that she has clear objectives with regard to the judiciary, with regard to the Constitutional Court. She came into that interview with a list of the goals that she said she would attain when she was, did her interview for the presidency of the SCA in 2017. And point by point, she pointed out how she'd achieved those, particularly and most impressively in the number of women judges serving at the SCA, which had been taken from a relatively small amount to 11 out of 23 now. Pointing out and addressing, issues of transformation, but also issues of collegiality within a court, and coming with very clear ideas, very practical ideas, which are embedded in her ability as an administrator, as a manager of the SCA, to take the judiciary and the Court forward. But of course, Mbuyiseli Madlanga, also an impressive candidate. He really is a seminal, jurist in terms of some of the very important judgments that he's written. But ultimately, of course, it's going to be about what does the judiciary need right now, and who is the candidate that ultimately President Cyril Ramaphosa believes has displayed those kind of attributes in these interviews.
So brings us to what is it that the panel and ultimately in making that decision, the president would be looking for here, Karyn?
Well, ultimately, the JSC, Dali Mpofu, part of a press briefing yesterday saying, that there were three categories amongst them, actually administrative ability, management ability, leadership, and of course, a grasp of the law. But, beyond that, the person in the position of Chief Justice is going to take over the Judicial Service Commission. They're going to chair them. They're going to need to be responsible for the disciplining of other judges, because that's the position that's involved. They're going to come into the courts at a time where, I think Mandisa pointed out yesterday that the Afrobarometer indicates that public faith in the judiciary is diminishing. There's a great deal of, attack being leveled at the court, at various courts, various judges. We know, for instance, that the acting Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, is under almost constant protection because of his role in the state capture inquiry. So the stakes are very high. And you need someone who is not only a good leader, but someone who is going to know how to steer the ship that is the judiciary through these very choppy waters. In an instance where we know that the courts have been so pivotal to maintaining and upholding rule of law in South Africa.
And of course, that very important, and the questions coming from the commissioners. Julius Malema, for example, asking the same question to both candidates about the members of the judges, visiting politicians on matters of national importance and the perception that might create. So what did you make of that and the importance of that particular issue?
I think it was, I'm not entirely sure, which specific instance he's referring to. I think it may be in relation to certain of the evidence that emerged during, the former President Jacob Zuma's unsuccessful attempt to get DCJ, as he then was, Raymond Zondo, to recuse himself. where he made issues of Zondo engagements with Zondo, which may or may not have been personal, and Zondo said he met with the former president in a professional capacity. But it's really not clear to me at this point if he's utilizing a specific example or if he's aware of some incident that has occurred that he's going to put to any of the two, judges that are going to be interviewed. But Mandisa Maya was, addressing that question yesterday in the context of her decision to recuse herself from the Judicial Service Commission's vote on whether or not to sustain the Judicial Conduct Committee Tribunal's findings that Judge President John Hlophe was indeed guilty of gross misconduct after he was found to have tried to sway two constitutional judges to rule in favor of Zuma. And she explained to the JSC yesterday that the reason that she had absented herself from that vote and sent an alternative person was because she had a long-standing relationship with Hlophe, who she said she regarded as, quote-unquote, a big brother. And she was speaking about the fact that, within the framework of the courts and the judiciary and the law, perceptions of bias are all they need to be to make a judge turn around and say, I shouldn't be doing this. This is not a proper thing for me to do because it has the potential to bring the judiciary into disrepute. And I think that, that was the issue around Hlophe in Mandisa Maya's case was possibly one of the more thorny issues that she was going to tackle. But in explaining why she had done that, she really got to the heart of what I think Malema is trying to address with this, at this stage, hypothetical question, which is really about the public needing to have absolute faith in the impartiality of the judges that decide their cases.
And then, Karyn, of course, the gender question and the transformation of the judiciary. That, of course, is one of those thorny issues. And interesting questions, and answers from both candidates with regard to some of that. Let's start with Mandisa Maya, Judge Maya, and being asked that question about whether South Africa is ready for a female Chief Justice. So, what did you make of her response to that?
Well, I think at one stage she said, and I agree completely with her as a woman, that question is quite annoying to women.
It
because
is.
Really, we make up the majority of the population. It's like asking, is South Africa ready for a human being to lead the courts? Why is gender now being put forward as a possible blockage to a woman leading because South Africa may or may not be ready? She said that South Africans have always been ready, and she actually said that she did not regard it as a proper question. Of course, the original root of the question, as you and I saw on Tuesday, was the Speaker of Parliament, Speaker Mapisa Mqakula, asking that of Mbuyiseli Madlanga. And he, of course, being very possibly making a strategically problematic and strange decision in declining to initially respond to that question. But of course, it was revived during Mandisa Maya's interview, and she was, made it very clear that while it was an incredible privilege for her as a woman to, as Commissioner Lucas pointed out, crack the glass ceiling for females by being the first woman in South African history to be nominated for the Chief Justice position, it was apparent that when she came there, she was like, I am the best person for this job, and let me explain to you why. And I also think what she did, which was incredibly clever, was right at the beginning of the interview, she addressed all the possible grounds of critique that could be leveled against her, amongst other things that, she would be completely new to the constitutional court, what kind of relationship we have with colleagues. Five of the SCA candidates from the Constitutional Court, had actually served under her.
And so it's going to be very interesting. We, of course, have two more to go. We have Judge Dunstan Mlambo today, and, of course, tomorrow, the DCJ, the Acting Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo. So, as you said, at this point, Mandisa Maya is the one to beat. So, expectations for the two candidates that we are still to see?
I think that, the interviews are going to be very fiery. I think that has already been hinted at by some of the questions that particularly Mbuyiseli Madlanga faced. We all just need to think back to Julius Malema asking him, if commissions were just a waste of money. It's very clear he's going to go with that. This issue of, was it appropriate for judges to have press conferences? An obvious reference to DCJ Raymond Zondo's response to Tourism Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, referring or comparing black judges to quote-unquote house Negroes. So it's very apparent that there's going to be very strident questioning of both Dunstan and Mlambo. And I think ultimately Raymond Zondo, I think those interviews are going to be pure fireworks from beginning to end.
And they're likely to be, but of course, as we've seen in the past, Karyn, there have been questions around the line of questioning from the members of the JSC as well. So looking at what we've observed thus far, and again, of course, I'm asking you to speculate, but just in terms of what's likely to happen, given some of the judgments that the two people coming up have been involved in, and the Zondo Commission for the acting Chief Justice, the line of questioning is obviously going to be something that people will be watching keenly.
I think it's important to remember that, the JSC was successfully taken to court by CASAC over their conduct in relation to the interviews of the Constitutional Court nominees in April last year, where, there was this very vociferous confrontation between Julius Malema and Judge Jaya Pillay over her friendship with Karyn Maughan. We, of course, saw the then Chief Justice Mogoeng getting involved in that. There were a number of questions put to, Judge David Unterholzer, including about his participation as a Jewish judge in the Jewish Board of Deputies. There were some remarks that many people felt were not appropriate in those circumstances. And then also some quite potentially blatant misogyny directed at Judge Kathri Selewane. So, those interviews demonstrated what CASAC argued was clear bias, a clear failure to bring an open mind to the process. And I think, the problem will be if we see a situation where there is softer questioning given to candidates who are fully able to answer the tough questions, and then unbelievably harsh questioning and possibly, questioning that crosses the line in terms of what is appropriate of these other two candidates, the JSC will again face the accusation that it's not bringing an open mind to these processes. And that will be something that, it may well face those accusations again in court. But I think the thing to stress here from the beginning is that in this instance, unlike with the Concourt interviews, it is ultimately President Cyril Ramaphosa's call. And if he is not satisfied with what the JSC does in terms of its work in evaluating these candidates, he can simply override them.
So just a final question then, Karyn, with regard to tough and soft questions, how do you think it's gone for the first two candidates?
I think there was an obvious contrast between the kind of questioning that Mbuyiseli Madlanga faced versus what Mandisa Maya faced. Which is unfortunate because I have massive respect for Mandisa Maya, and I think that she could answer any question that was put to her. Maybe there would be criticism over the fact that she should have been engaged with a bit more on the Hlophe issue and the circumstances under which judges should recuse themselves. But having watched JSC interviews for a number of years, it does have this unfortunate pathology of being almost overly favorable to the candidates that it supports, that members support, and then being unduly harsh to those that it does not. And I think that is a problem because ultimately the person who you choose as Chief Justice needs to be given an opportunity not only to highlight all their strengths, but to deal with the weaknesses that they bring, the controversies they bring in an environment that is respectful and that enables them to address the issues in a way that assures the South African public or gives them a certainty over whether or not they are the right person for this job. And unfortunately, when these biases get displayed, as was so obvious with those constitutional court interviews, people are denied that opportunity. And I think that that's to the detriment of the entire process.
Well, Karyn, we're going to have to park it there, not leave it, but park it for the time being. Looking forward to basically analysing and unpacking the last two interviews as well, because this is going to be an interesting one. But thank you so much for your time this morning. And that, of course, was legal journalist Karyn Maughan discussing what has transpired so far with 2 of the 4 interviews for the position of Chief Justice of South Africa.